The morning sun crept over the horizon as Yates Winston tightened the cinch on his saddle, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the slight tremor that accompanied thoughts of her. 10 years had passed since he'd last set foot in Cottonwood Springs. 10 long years of running from memories that refused to fade, memories of violet summers and promises made under a star-filled Texas sky. The year was 1878, and the West was changing. Railroad tracks stretched across once untamed land, bringing civilization to places that had known only wildness. Yates had changed to no longer the eager 20-year-old ranch hand with dreams bigger than his pockets, but a seasoned 30-year-old cowboy who'd carved out a respectable living driving cattle across 3 territories. His horse, a dappled gray named Thunder, snorted impatiently as Yates secured the last of his belongings. The letter that had brought him back to Cottonwood Springs was folded in his breast pocket, the paper worn from repeated readings. Old man Jeffers was selling the Triple J Ranch, and he wanted Yates to have first consideration. It was the opportunity he'd always dreamed of, his own spread, his own brand. But returning meant facing what he'd left behind. Just passing through, he muttered to himself, swinging up into the saddle. Get the papers signed and be on your way before anyone recognizes you. The trail into Cottonwood Springs wound through hills dotted with mesquite and live oak. As he crested the final rise, Yates pulled Thunder to a halt, taking in the sight of the town nestled in the valley below. It had grown. New buildings lined the main street, and the steeple of a proper church rose above the rooftops. Progress had found this corner of Texas, just as it had everywhere else. The memory hit him without warning. Violet's laughter as they'd stood on this very hill, her hand in his as they planned their future. One day, he'd told her, I'll build you a house with a porch that wraps all the way around, and you can watch our children play while I tend to the cattle. Yates pushed the memory aside and nudged Thunder forward. No sense dwelling on what couldn't be changed. The main street of Cottonwood Springs was busy with midday traffic wagons loaded with supplies, cowboys fresh from the trail, and townspeople going about their business. Yates kept his hat pulled low, nodding curtly to those who glanced his way but avoiding direct eye contact. The last thing he needed was a reunion before he'd steadied himself. He dismounted outside the cattleman's bank, tying Thunder to the hitching post. Inside, the cool air was a welcome relief from the May heat. A clerk directed him to a private office at the back, where Milton Jeffers awaited. The old rancher hadn't changed much, still rail-thin with a shock of white hair and eyes that missed nothing. He rose from behind his desk, extending a hand. Yates Winston, wasn't sure you'd come. Yates shook the offered hand. Your letter caught up with me in Abilene, figured it was worth the ride. Jeffers gestured to a chair. Sit down, son, we've got business to discuss. For the next hour, they talked cattle, water rights, and acreage. The Triple J was everything Yates had ever wanted: 15,000 acres of prime grazing land with reliable water sources and existing structures. The price was steep but fair, especially with the terms Jeffers was offering. Why me? Yates finally asked. Must be others interested with deeper pockets. Jeffers leaned back in his chair. Because you know the land, because you respect it. And because I promised Martha before she passed that I'd see the Triple J go to someone who'd love it like we did. Yates swallowed past the sudden tightness in his throat. Martha Jeffers had been kind to him, a motherless boy learning the ropes of ranching. There's papers to sign, Jeffers continued, and I'll need the first payment within 60 days. Think you can manage that? Yates nodded. I've saved most of what I've earned these past years. Was planning to buy a spread up in Colorado, but this is better. After signing the preliminary agreement, Yates stepped back onto the boardwalk, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. He was so distracted that he nearly collided with a woman carrying a basket of supplies. Pardon me, madam, he said automatically, reaching out to steady her. And then he froze. Violet Summers stood before him, her blue eyes widening in recognition. She looked different, older, of course, but with a maturity that went beyond the passage of years. Her blonde hair was swept up beneath a practical bonnet, and her dress, while simple, was well-made and becoming. Yates? His name on her lips was barely more than a whisper. He couldn't find words, couldn't do anything but stare at the woman he'd left behind, the woman he'd loved with every fiber of his being, the woman who had married another man. "It's been a long time," he finally managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "10 years," she replied. "I heard you were driving cattle up to Montana, Wyoming mostly, sometimes further." He shifted uncomfortably. "I just concluded some business with Mr. Jeffers." A flash of understanding crossed her face. "The Triple J, you're buying it. News travels fast. Small town." She adjusted her grip on the basket. "Are you staying then?" Before he could answer, a young girl came running up, her blonde hair falling in ringlets around a face that was so achingly familiar that Yates felt his heart stop. "Mama, Mr. Thompson says he has the fabric you ordered." The girl skidded to a halt, looking curiously at Yates. Violet placed a hand on the child's shoulder. "Thank you, Emma. This is an old friend of mine, Mr. Winston." Emma, perhaps 9 years old, offered a polite curtsy. "Pleased to meet you, sir." Yates tipped his hat automatically, his mind racing. 9 years. The timing couldn't be coincidence, but Violet had married Thomas Sullivan just weeks after Yates had left town. "I should be getting back," Violet said, her voice carefully controlled. "Emma has lessons this afternoon." "Of course." Yates stepped aside. "It was good to see you, Violet." She hesitated, then met his gaze directly. "Welcome back to Cottonwood Springs, Yates." He watched them walk away, the elegant woman and the little girl who moved with the same natural grace. His heart pounded against his ribs as possibilities he'd never considered took root in his mind. That evening, ensconced in a room at the Cottonwood Hotel, Yates tried to make sense of the day's events. He'd come to town planning to conclude his business and leave immediately. Now he found himself contemplating staying not just to develop the ranch, but to uncover the truth about Emma Sullivan. Sleep eluded him, and at dawn, he saddled Thunder and rode out to the Triple J. The ranch house sat on a gentle rise, overlooking a creek that fed into a stand of cottonwoods. The barn and outbuildings were weathered but sound, and the corrals would need only minor repairs before they could hold cattle. As the sun climbed higher, Yates rode the boundaries of what would soon be his property. It was good land, better than he remembered. By midday, he decided he would stay and make this work, regardless of what complications awaited in town. Returning to Cottonwood Springs in the late afternoon, Yates sought out the local saloon. He needed information, and saloons were where news flowed as freely as whiskey. The Silverlode was a step above the rough establishments he'd frequented on Cattle Drive's clean floors, polished bar, and a piano player who actually knew how to carry a tune. Yates ordered a whiskey and took it to a corner table, listening to the conversations around him. It didn't take long before he heard a familiar name. "Sullivan's widow sure has done well with that dress shop of hers," a man at the bar was saying. "Finest seamstress this side of San Antonio." "Shame about Tom, though," his companion replied. "Killed in that mining accident barely a year after they wed, left her with a baby on the way and not much else." Yates gripped his glass tighter. Thomas Sullivan had died 9 years ago, which meant, "Afternoon, stranger, mind if I join you?" Yates looked up to see a man about his own age, dressed in the dark suit of a lawman with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. "Free country," Yates replied, gesturing to the empty chair. The sheriff settled himself, studying Yates with interest. "Name's Henry Parker. Don't believe we've met." "Yates Winston." Recognition flickered in Parker's eyes. "Winston, you used to work for old Jeffers, didn't you? Left town some years back." "That's right. And now you're buying his spread." It wasn't a question. "Planning to stay then?" Yates took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Seems that way." Parker nodded thoughtfully. "Cottonwood Springs has changed since you left. We've got a proper school now, a doctor who actually studied medicine, and the railroads coming through next year." "Progress," Yates commented neutrally. "Indeed." Parker leaned forward slightly. Word of advice, Winston. Whatever business brought you back, tread carefully. Some wounds take a long time to heal. With that cryptic warning, the sheriff stood, nodded politely, and made his way back to the bar. Yates finished his drink, considering the implications of what he'd just learned. If Thomas Sullivan had died before Emma was born, then the possibility that had been forming in his mind since yesterday was more than just wishful thinking. The next morning, Yates found himself outside Violet's dress shop before he'd fully decided what to say. The sign above the door read, "Summer's Dressmaking and Alterations," and through the window he could see bolts of fabric arranged by color. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. A bell jangled overhead, and a young woman he didn't recognize looked up from a counter where she was cutting pattern pieces. "May I help you, sir? I'm looking for Mrs. Sullivan. She's in the back with a customer. Would you like to wait?" Yates nodded, removing his hat. The shop was neat and well organized, with examples of Violet's work displayed on mannequins. He recalled that she had always been skilled with a needle, even as a girl. The sound of a door opening drew his attention, and Violet appeared, escorting an older woman to the front of the shop. When she spotted Yates, she faltered momentarily before recovering her professional demeanor. "Mrs. Hawkins, I'll have those alterations ready by Friday. Thank you for your patronage." After seeing her customer out, Violet turned to face Yates. "This is unexpected. I apologize for the intrusion. I was hoping we might talk privately." She seemed to consider this, then nodded. "Clara, would you mind watching the front for a few minutes?" The young assistant agreed, and Violet led Yates through a door into a small office at the rear of the shop. It was a tidy space with a desk, 2 chairs, and shelves of ledgers and fabric samples. "What can I do for you, Mr. Winston?" Violet asked, taking a seat behind the desk. Yates remained standing, his hat in his hands. "I heard about Thomas. I'm sorry for your loss." Her expression softened slightly. "Thank you, it was a long time ago. I also heard that he passed before Emma was born." Violet went very still, her fingers interlacing on the desk before her. "Yes, Emma never knew her father." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Yates gathered his courage. "Violet, I need to ask, is Emma my daughter?" Violet closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. When she opened them, there was a mixture of defiance and resignation in her gaze. "Yes. Emma is your daughter." Though he'd suspected it, hearing the confirmation aloud was like a physical blow. Yates sank into the chair opposite her desk, his legs suddenly unsteady. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Tell you," Violet's calm facade cracked. "How was I supposed to tell you? You left without a word, Yates. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. I had no idea where you were." "I wrote to you," he protested. "From Dodge City, from Abilene, from a dozen places along the trail." She shook her head. "I never received any letters." My father died 6 months after you left," Violet said sharply. "Whatever grievance you had with him died with him." Yates absorbed this information. Samuel Summers had made no secret of his disapproval of Yates as a suitor for his daughter. A man without property or prospects wasn't good enough for a Summers, he declared, but to intercept letters. "I was coming back for you," Yates said quietly. "I just needed to make something of myself first, and then I heard you'd married Sullivan." "I didn't have many options," Violet replied, her voice softer now. "An unmarried woman expecting a child, you know what that means in a town like this. Thomas was kind. He offered me his name, his protection. Did he know that the child wasn't his?" "Yes. He knew I was carrying another man's baby when he proposed. He was a good man, Yates. He treated Emma as his own until the day he died." Yates felt a surge of gratitude toward the man he'd once resented. "I'm glad you weren't alone." Violet's composure wavered. "But I was alone. Thomas died in that mining accident when I was 8 months along. I've been raising Emma by myself ever since." "I'm sorry," Yates said, meaning it. "If I had known." "What would you have done?" she challenged. "Come riding back to save us? We didn't need saving, Yates. We've built a life here." "A good life from what I can see," he acknowledged. "You've done well, Violet, I'm proud of you." She blinked rapidly as if fighting tears. "What do you want, Yates? Why are you here now?" It was the question he'd been asking himself since yesterday. I want to know my daughter. And I want a chance to explain why I left, why I stayed away so long. Emma believes Thomas Sullivan was her father. It's all she's ever known. I understand that. I'm not asking to upend her life overnight, but she deserves to know the truth eventually. And I deserve a chance to be part of her life. Violet stood, moving to the window that overlooked the alley behind the shop. "You're staying then? This isn't just a brief visit." "I've signed the papers for the Triple J," Yates confirmed. "I'm staying." She turned to face him. "I need time to think about this, to figure out how to introduce you into Emma's life without confusing her." "Take all the time you need," he said, rising. "I'm not going anywhere this time." As he prepared to leave, Violet stopped him with a question. "Why did you go, Yates?" "All these years, I've wondered what I did to make you leave without even saying goodbye." The pain in her voice cut him to the quick. "It wasn't you, Violet. Your father came to me the night before I left, said he'd have me arrested for theft if I didn't clear out of the county. Said he'd make sure you believed the worst of me." Her eyes widened. "Theft? You never stole anything in your life. Didn't matter if it was true. His word against mine, and in those days Samuel Summers' word was law in Cottonwood Springs." Yates shook his head. "I was young and scared. I thought if I could make something of myself, earn enough to buy a place of my own, I could come back and prove him wrong. By the time I heard you'd married, it seemed too late." Violet pressed a hand to her mouth. "All these years, wasted because of his pride." "Not wasted," Yates corrected gently. "You raised a beautiful daughter, you built this business, and I learned what I needed to know to run a ranch properly." She lowered her hand, composing herself. "Sunday dinner," she said abruptly. "Come to our home for Sunday dinner. We can tell Emma that you're an old friend who's returned to town. It's a start." "Thank you," Yates said, placing his hat on his head. "I'll be there." The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Yates began the process of taking ownership of the Triple J. He hired workers to repair fences and outbuildings, ordered supplies, and arranged for a small herd to be delivered from a breeder in San Antonio. The work kept his hands busy while his mind grappled with the knowledge that he had a daughter, a 9-year-old girl who had no idea who he really was. Sunday arrived clear and warm. Yates bathed thoroughly, shaved with extra care, and put on the one good suit he owned. As he rode into town, he rehearsed what he might say to Emma, how he would begin building a relationship with a child who was his blood but a stranger in every other way. Violet's house was a tidy white clapboard structure on the edge of town, with a small garden in front and a swing hanging from the branch of an old oak tree. Yates tied Thunder to the hitching post and approached the front door, a bundle of wildflowers in his hand. Emma answered his knock, her blue eyes his eyes regarding him with curiosity. "Hello, Mr. Winston. Mama said you were coming for dinner." "Thank you for having me," he replied, offering the flowers. "These are for you and your mother." She accepted them with a pleased smile. "They're beautiful." "Mama, look what Mr. Winston brought." Violet appeared in the doorway behind her daughter, wiping her hands on an apron. "How thoughtful. Emma, why don't you put these in water while I show Mr. Winston to the parlor?" The small house was immaculately kept, with simple but tasteful furnishings. Photographs adorned the mantel. Emma as a baby, Emma on her first day of school, Violet and Emma together in their Sunday best. "You have a lovely home," Yates said sincerely. "It's modest, but it suits us," Violet replied. "Please sit down, dinner will be ready shortly." The meal was the best Yates had eaten in years: roast chicken with all the trimmings, fresh bread, and an apple pie for dessert. Throughout dinner, Emma peppered him with questions about his travels, his ranch, and whether he'd ever fought Indians or outlaws. "Only a few scrapes here and there," he told her, downplaying the dangers he'd faced. "Mostly being a cowboy is hard work and long hours." "Like Mama's dress shop," Emma observed. "She works all the time, too." "Your mother always was determined," Yates said, glancing at Violet. Even when we were young. Emma's eyes widened. You knew Mama when she was young, were you sweethearts? Violet nearly choked on her water, but Yates answered calmly, we were friends, good friends. Then why did you go away for so long? The directness of childhood cut straight to the heart of the matter. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, Yates said carefully. I made a big one when I left Cottonwood Springs, but I'm back now and I'm hoping we can all be friends again. After dinner, while Emma cleared the table, Violet led Yates to the porch. The evening air was cooling, carrying the scent of honeysuckle from a vine that climbed the side of the house. She likes you, Violet said quietly. She's been talking about nothing else since I told her you were coming to dinner. She's amazing, Yates replied. Smart, polite, curious, you've done a fine job raising her. It hasn't always been easy, there were times. Violet trailed off, then continued more firmly, but we managed. And now she's growing up so fast. Will you tell her about me, I mean, Violet sighed. Not yet, she needs time to get to know you first, to trust you, and I need to be sure. That I won't disappear again, Yates finished for her. I understand, I'll earn that trust, Violet, from both of you. She turned to face him, the fading light casting her features in soft shadow. Why did you never marry Yates? Surely there were women in all those years. None that mattered. The admission came easily. I tried to forget you, Violet. God knows I tried, but no one else ever measured up. Before she could respond, Emma burst onto the porch. Mama, can Mr. Winston come see my treehouse? Please, I want to show him how Papa helped me build it before he went to heaven. Violet hesitated, then nodded. If Mr. Winston would like to, I'd be honored, Yates said, rising from his chair. Emma led him to the backyard, chattering excitedly about the construction of her tree house in a sturdy elm. Yates listened attentively, his heart swelling with pride at his daughter's enthusiasm and ingenuity. As the weeks passed, Yates divided his time between developing the Triple J and visiting Cottonwood Springs. He became a regular Sunday dinner guest at Violet's home and occasionally took Emma riding or fishing, always with Violet's permission and often with her accompaniment. The townsfolk took note of his return and his growing relationship with the Sullivan widow and her daughter. Gossip inevitably followed, but Sheriff Parker made it clear that he wouldn't tolerate any disrespect toward Violet or Emma. People have long memories, the sheriff told Yates one afternoon as they shared a drink at the Silver Lode. They remember you leaving, and they remember Violet marrying mighty quick afterward. Some are doing the math. Let them talk, Yates replied. I'm not hiding anything. Except from Emma, Parker pointed out. That's Violet's decision to make. When she thinks the time is right, we'll tell Emma together. June turned to July and July to August. The Triple J began to take shape as Yates envisioned it, with new cattle grazing the pastures and repairs transforming the ranch house into a comfortable home. Yet it felt empty in the evenings when he sat alone on the porch, thinking of Violet and Emma in their tidy house in town. On a sweltering August afternoon, Yates was mending a section of fence when he saw a rider approaching at a gallop. As the figure drew closer, he recognized Clara, Violet's assistant from the dress shop. Mr. Winston, she called, reining her horse to a stop. You must come quickly. There's been an accident. Emma fell from her tree house. The doctor's with her now, but she's asking for you. Cold fear gripped Yates as he swung onto Thunder's back. How bad is it? Her arms broken for sure, and she hit her head. Mrs. Sullivan is beside herself. They rode hard for town, Yates's mind racing with terrible possibilities. By the time they reached Violet's house, a small crowd had gathered outside. Sheriff Parker was keeping them at bay, but he stepped aside to let Yates through. She's conscious, Parker told him. Doc Williams is setting the brake now. Inside, Yates found Violet pacing the hallway outside Emma's bedroom, her face pale with worry. When she saw him, she rushed forward, clutching his arms. She climbed too high, Violet said, her voice shaking. The branch broke. If she'd landed differently, but she didn't, Yates said firmly, steadying her. She's going to be fine. Emma's strong like her mother. The door to Emma's room opened and Dr. Williams emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. The break is clean. I've set it and splinted it. She'll need to keep it immobile for several weeks, but children heal quickly. As for the head injury, there's a nasty bump but no signs of serious damage. Still, you'll want to wake her every few hours tonight just to be safe. Can we see her? Violet asked. She's asking for both of you, the doctor replied, glancing between Violet and Yates with an expression that suggested he too had been doing the math. Emma lay in her bed, her left arm splinted and bandaged, a bruise darkening on her forehead. Despite these injuries, she managed a weak smile when they entered. "I'm sorry, Mama. I know you told me not to climb so high." Violet sat on the edge of the bed, carefully smoothing Emma's hair back from the bruise. "As long as you're all right, that's what matters. You gave us quite a scare." "Mr. Winston came," Emma observed, looking past her mother to where Yates stood hesitantly in the doorway. "Of course I came," he said, moving closer. "Clara rode out to tell me you were hurt. Did you ever fall out of a tree when you were little?" Yates smiled, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "Once or twice. I broke my wrist jumping off the barn roof when I was about your age, thought I could fly like a bird." This drew a giggle from Emma, followed by a wince. "It hurts when I laugh. Then I'll try not to be funny," Yates promised. "You just rest and get better." Emma's eyes began to droop as the laudanum Dr. Williams had administered took effect. "Will you stay?" she asked sleepily. "Both of you will be right here," Violet assured her. As Emma drifted off to sleep, Violet and Yates retreated to the hallway, leaving the door ajar. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Violet said. "Seeing you calmed her down." "I'd have come from the ends of the earth if she needed me," Yates replied simply. Violet studied his face for a long moment. "I know you would have, that's why. I think it's time we told her the truth when she's recovered enough." Yates felt a surge of hope. "Are you sure? I've been thinking about it for weeks, watching you with her, seeing how naturally you care for her. She deserves to know who her real father is." Violet took a deep breath. "And you deserve to be more than just a family friend." That night, Yates insisted on staying to help Violet monitor Emma. They took turns checking on her, waking her briefly as the doctor had instructed, then letting her fall back to sleep. In the quiet hours between these checks, they really talked for the first time in 10 years. Violet spoke of her struggles as a young widow with a newborn, how she'd started taking in sewing to make ends meet, eventually saving enough to open her shop. Yates shared stories of the cattle drives, the boom towns, the times he'd nearly given up hope of ever having a place to call his own. As dawn broke, they sat together on the porch swing, exhausted but relieved that Emma had made it through the night without complication. "Do you remember the last time we sat together like this?" Violet asked softly. "The night before I left," Yates replied, "on your father's porch. You were wearing a blue dress with tiny flowers on it. Your hair was longer then. You noticed all that?" "I noticed everything about you, Violet. Still do." She was quiet for a moment. "I was so angry with you for leaving. For years, I held on to that anger. It was easier than admitting how much I missed you." "And now?" Yates asked, hardly daring to hope. Violet turned to face him. "Now I understand why you left, and I'm beginning to think that maybe it's not too late for us." The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility. Yates reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "It's never been too late," he said. "Not in my heart." 2 weeks later, on a perfect September evening, Yates sat with Violet and Emma on a blanket spread beneath the cottonwood trees that gave the town its name. Emma's arm was still in its splint, but she had recovered her spirits and energy. They had decided that this quiet spot, away from the town's curious eyes, was the right place to tell Emma the truth. Violet had prepared a picnic, and after they'd eaten, she nodded to Yates, signaling that the moment had come. "Emma," Violet began, "do you remember asking why Mr. Winston went away for so long?" Emma nodded, looking between the two adults with curious eyes. "There's something important we need to tell you," Violet continued. "Something about Mr. Winston and about you." As gently as possible, they explained the truth that Yates was Emma's real father, that circumstances had forced them apart before she was born, and that Thomas Sullivan had stepped in to care for them both. Emma listened silently, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to thoughtfulness. "So, Papa Thomas wasn't really my papa?" she finally asked. "He was your papa in all the ways that mattered," Yates assured her. "He loved you and took care of you, but yes, I'm your father by birth." Emma considered this. "Is that why I have blue eyes like yours instead of brown eyes like Papa Thomas had?" "That's right," Violet said, amazed at her daughter's practical response. "And is that why you came back? Because you found out about me?" Yates shook his head. "I came back to buy the Triple J, not knowing about you. Finding out I had a daughter was the most wonderful surprise of my life." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "What should I call you?" she finally asked. "Whatever feels right to you," Yates replied. "Mr. Winston is fine for now, or Yates, and if someday you want to call me Pa or Father, well, that would make me the happiest man in Texas." Emma nodded seriously. "I'll think about it." Then, with the resilience of childhood, she changed the subject. "Can we go fishing tomorrow?" "You promised to teach me how to bait my own hook." Yates laughed, relief flooding through him. "Yes, we can go fishing tomorrow." As they packed up the picnic, Emma ran ahead to chase a butterfly, leaving Violet and Yates alone for a moment. "She took it better than I expected," Violet said. "She's remarkable," Yates replied. "Like her mother." Violet smiled, then grew serious. "There's something else we need to discuss. The town is talking, Yates, about us, about Emma. I've never cared much for gossip, but it's not fair to Emma," Yates finished. "I agree." He took Violet's hands in his, drawing her closer. "Violet Summers, I loved you when we were barely more than children. I loved you during every mile I traveled away from you, and I love you now more than ever. Will you marry me?" Not just for Emma's sake, but because we've been given a second chance at the life we planned all those years ago, tears welled in Violet's eyes. "Are you sure? Your life has been so different from mine. You've seen so much more of the world. And all I've learned is that nothing matters without someone to share it with." Yates brushed a tear from her cheek. "You and Emma are my world now. Say you'll be my wife." "Yes," Violet whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." As the autumn leaves began to turn, Yates Winston married Violet Summers in the church on Cottonwood Springs Main Street. Emma stood beside them, her arm finally free of its splint, beaming as the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed. Even those who had whispered behind their hands seemed genuinely happy for the couple whose love had endured 10 years of separation. After the festivities, Yates drove his new family out to the Triple J in a wagon laden with their belongings. The ranch house gleamed with fresh paint, and a new porch wrapped around it just as he had promised Violet all those years ago. As they crested the final hill, Yates pulled the wagon to a halt, turning to Violet and Emma. "Welcome home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Emma scrambled from the wagon, racing toward the house with excited shouts. Violet remained seated, her eyes taking in the scene before them, the house, the land, the future stretching out before them. "It's just as you described it," she said softly. "That night on the hill when we were young." Yates took her hand, pressing it to his lips. "Some promises are worth keeping, no matter how long it takes." As the sun set over the Triple J, casting long shadows across the land that was now theirs, Yates helped Violet down from the wagon. She stepped into his embrace and he held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, the reality of her presence. "Never again," he whispered against her temple. "I'll never leave you again." And as their daughter called to them from the porch of their new home, Yates and Violet walked hand in hand toward the future. They had always meant to share a future that had waited patiently for them to find their way back to each other.